Om Ajnanatimidandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Dhena Tasmai Shri Gurave. It just seems like such a commonsensical thing to do, to organize information and make it available to people and allow them to improve themselves. And society is, to come together in community is so important, to discuss ideas for the betterment of the spirit, and in all ways. So churches like this are really the foundation of community, where people come together with the highest of intentions in order to be together and to discuss and to come to higher understanding of the purpose of life. So when I was invited to come here, I felt very excited about it. And I've been traveling quite a bit this year with my wife. She's a little sick tonight, so she couldn't come. Just getting on and off of these airplanes a lot. We just came from Toronto, Canada, where, fortunately, because now it feels warm here. And that the subject matter that Susan picked out, I found compelling also. The idea of service is so universal and so uniting. The topic of service actually comes up at the very beginning of my spiritual master's introduction to perhaps the most important book that we have in our canon, which is the Bhagavad-gita. Do all of you know about the Bhagavad-gita? Have heard of it? It's in a Sanskrit literature said to be around 5,000 years old. Came from a dialogue between Krishna, who is considered by those in the line of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, which is widely known as Hinduism. Other people call it Sanatana Dharma. Many people revere and follow the teachings of the Bhagavad-gita. In Sanskrit, Bhagavad means the opulent one, or God, and Gita means song. So, just in a very literal way, it could be called the Song of God. And there's a dialogue between the chariot driver and the greatest martial artist of all time, who's just entering into battle. And he loses his nerve at the last moment, and then asks for advice from his chariot driver, who just happens to be God. And actually there was a movie based on this called Bagger Vance. I think it had Will Smith in it. And they transposed the setting to a golfing field, where there's a golfer who's a top golfer, but he begins to fall apart, and then his caddy helps him out by teaching him how to stay neutral and stay focused and things like that. So in the introduction to this book called Bhagavad-gita, my teacher had written extensively about service. And one of the points he made seemed quite important to me when I first read it, and it was revealing, and that is that everyone renders service. He pointed out that even those who may think themselves in the position of master are serving in a different capacity. For instance, he points out that someone may run for a public office in order to have some control, but he or she does so on the basis of how well he or she will serve the general populace, and presents that as the reason that he or she should be elected. And that in all circumstances, we're rendering service to someone else. So, in the very basic understanding of the philosophy of Bhagavad-gita, there's this idea that every soul is a servant. And this is what is called its swarup, or its original nature. And when one comes out of alignment with that original nature, And if we think of serving, when we say servant, actually, if you look up the word, the origins come from the word slave. So it can be a little bit off-putting to some. But the idea really of being a servant is giving. Someone who extends oneself in order to assist someone else. Going outside oneself to do something for another. And there are various ways of serving. But the highest way of serving is to be in alignment with serving, according to Bhagavad-gita, our original divine source, God. And in the context of the tradition I come from, that when we say God, we say Krishna, which is a word in Sanskrit which means the all-attractive one. The one that is the source of all things that we're actually looking for, that we seek in life. And this concept of service is universal, and it's a panacea. There's a way in which directing our service, which we may now direct to various places. For instance, has anybody ever worked for, let's say, a boss in some kind of job? Yes? Okay. And how did it work out? I mean, some cases well, maybe. And in other cases, maybe not so well. There are contexts in which I'm serving that may not satisfy me. And so the Bhagavad-gita and also the other bhakti literatures, and bhakti is another name which means, it actually refers to the practice of awakening one's original serving nature towards the Supreme. So we call it bhakti yoga. Can everyone say bhakti? Bhakti yoga. So bhakti yoga means the process through which one awakens and directs very deliberately one's service propensity towards the Supreme. And the concept in the Bhagavad-gita is very much like when you eat food, you don't give it to any of the other limbs except for the stomach. When it goes to the stomach has the capability of then digesting and then distributing appropriately to all the various other entities in the body. The sugars are the glucose is broken down and given to the brain, so that's its food, and all the other cells have particular nutrients it needs. And the stomach does that job. It knows just where to put it. So in a similar way, when one serves the Supreme, when one serves God, there's a way in which all of God's parts, everything that's connected to God, also gets served. Another example, which is similar, is watering the root of a tree. When you water the root of the tree, then automatically the leaves and branches become nourished. And in a similar way, when one serves the Supreme, then everyone who's connected with God becomes satisfied. And who is there that's connected to God in one way or another, would you say? Okay, good, thanks. So that covers everything. And this is the idea. And then there's a concept in Sanskrit, which is the language that many of the original literatures on Bhakti Yoga are written. And there's a word called misery, a word for misery, which is duk. Everyone say duk. Duk. So duk, actually, if you look back through its etymology, you'll find that it means to be out of alignment. And an example that's often given is when you have an axle and it's not in alignment with the wheel of the cart that it's drawing. And what happens then? You get friction. What else happens? Unnecessary. What else? Anybody ever had this happen? I was in an old International Harvester. It was one of the first SUVs ever. And I think the person who bought it paid only a couple $100 for it. Never ride in a car you pay $200 for. Anyway, I was helping to bring it back, and we noticed smoke coming out, and then there was fire. And when we took it into a service station and they put out the fire, they did a little investigation and found out that the axle was out of alignment with the wheel. And it caused a fire. It's very serious. And so this disalignment really refers to forgetting about my original purpose. And because of forgetting my original purpose, which is to serve my original divine source, then I'm filled with many different kinds of anxieties. And there's a lot of friction in my life. So one very interesting saint from our tradition who happened to be a 5-year-old boy, his name was Prahlad. And he used to teach his friends at school during the break about spiritual knowledge. And one of the things he said that really stuck with me was that the moment that one starts thinking about how to please oneself, that's the moment that you start suffering. And if you reverse that and you begin thinking about how to render service to others, and ultimately, as I mentioned before, through the principle of serving the Supreme, through which all other entities become satisfied, then he said, then you immediately feel happy. This is not unknown to all kinds of modern philosophers. In fact, even Dale Carnegie, in his book called How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, says that whenever you find yourself in a very difficult situation and you're in great anxiety about something that may have happened, there's tragedy in your life. So one of the best ways to come out of that is to think about how to do good for others, to reach out. You actually grow by giving, which is counterintuitive to the way in which I might be oriented in this world. I may think that by becoming a better exploiter, and one might argue there are ways in which the education system is often set up so that one can become a better exploiter of the environment. I mean, it depends which way you look at it. It can also be for service as well. But the more of an exploiter I become, the more I become exploited. And the more that I become a giver or a servant of others, the more I begin to feel satisfied because I'm in alignment with my actual nature. So this is a simple concept that can be applied anywhere, and which is profoundly useful. And in fact, we may notice that those who do have an exploitative attitude are not as welcome as those who have a service attitude. Have you ever noticed that? If someone enters a community or even for the first time comes into an assembly, and that person obviously has motive to exploit others in a subtle or gross way, they're not so welcome. But those who display a service attitude, who feel, who are compelled by their alignment with this idea of one's original nature being to serve others and to serve the Supreme, that person becomes very welcome and useful in community. And this is an indication. Furthermore, it's very difficult to exploit the world. It's hard to become a master, actually. However, it's relatively simple to become a servant. There are not so many opportunities to exploit or master others that work out very well. But when you become a servant, there's opportunity everywhere. Wherever you go, in any nook or corner of the universe, you'll find that there's opportunity for service. So it's a better employment opportunity to think of oneself as a servant. And this is the basic tenet of the Bhagavad-gita. There are also ways in which to talk about various levels of service and purifying service, because, as I said, everybody's doing service anyway. But what is the best kind of service? And what kind of service actually brings us the highest happiness? And I'll talk about that in a second. But before I do, I'd like to take some reflections. And I do ask for reflections at various intervals. And what I mean by that is that I've given a monologue for about 10 minutes, probably. And anything that you heard, a sentence, a concept that you picked up on, that stuck with you, if you would just reflect it back, then it augments the point and brings it back to light. So just think to anything that might have stuck. Like if you walk out the door later and someone grabs you by the arm and says, "What was that guy talking about in there?" What one thing would you say so far? And we have a remote mic, and we'll pass it around. Yes.
I would appreciate the point of that as soon as we start making plans for our own satisfaction, we're already suffering. And that if you go into a community with that sort of mindset, that you're almost immediately rejected from that community.
Yeah, people notice. Yeah, thank you very much. Nice reflection. What else? What else did you hear? Any one thing that you heard that stuck? Yes.
I like this point if I'm concerned about employment, that if I'm looking to be a master, then it's going to be more scarce of opportunities. But if I'm looking to serve, then there's unlimited opportunities to do that.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, those who become the best at rendering service also generally rise to the top. Just in a general sense. It's the way it works. Those who become the best at rendering service become the most valuable to the rest of the world. What else? One thing that you heard. Yes?
You know the saying, we're built for speed?
Yes.
What I related to was we're built for service. And that in serving any part of God, we're serving God as a whole and all the parts of God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're built for service. I really like that. And then seeing how everything is connected to God is a very broad vision. And it's a spiritual vision. It's a vision that unites. In the Bhagavad-gita, there's a verse that says, "Vidya vinaya sampane brahmanega vihastani shuni chaiva shupakecha pandita samadarshina." I just recite the Sanskrit for authenticity. And there it says that a learned person, in fact, the word used in the verse for learned person is pundit. Has anybody heard this word before? Yeah. What context do you generally hear about it nowadays? Politics, that's right. You hear about it in political, here's a political pundit. Yeah, so the word comes from Sanskrit. And pundit means a learned person. So in this verse, Krishna is giving the definition of what he considers to be a pundit. And he says that a person who has equal vision, when a pundit looks out into the world, he sees that actually the bodies are only a covering for the spiritual soul. It's like a dress. And that there are various dresses that one can assume, but that's not the actual person. The actual person is the spiritual soul within. And therefore, the verse goes on to say whether he sees a cow, an elephant, a dog, or an outcasted person, a homeless person, sees the same spiritual essence and therefore shows a deep respect for each one, for all forms of life, seeing the common feature. And another verse from the Upanishads, which are very ancient literatures in Sanskrit, says, Yastu sarvani bhutani atmani vanupashyati sarva bhuteshu chatmanam tato na vijigupsate. One who sees everything in relationship to the Supreme Lord and sees the Supreme Lord within everything never hates anything or any being. Seeing that connection, seeing how everything is connected to the original divine source of everything. And so that there's in the expansion of service, a person becomes aware of the fact that everything that we see within the universe is coming from the divine, and recognizes that. And when service is rendered in that mentality, then it has a great effect. In fact, that's one of the next parts that I'm going to go into, but only after I get a few more reflections. Yes,
I'll give you one.
please.
Because this is what I would like you to.
I would like you to talk further on this. When you mentioned that when an exploited person comes into the room, people would repel from him as opposed to be attracted to him. Now my observation is quite different. That an exploited person is rich, is famous, is popular, has this charismatic sense about him. People will do anything for that exploited person. And so there's got to be something much deeper from what you were saying as to what causes good people to want to be withdrawn from that exploitation as opposed to be attracted to it. So that's what I want you to
Oh, a very deep
talk about.
deep point, yeah. Well, when I said when someone comes into the room, I was giving it in a little more of a figurative way, because your point is apt and well taken, that if we ran a double-blind experiment and an exploitative person came into various rooms, we wouldn't find people being immediately repelled. However, in a general sense, let's say over a longer period of time, using the law of large numbers and looking at long periods of time and how history judges certain kinds of people who are exploitative as compared to those who are maybe philanthropic or they give themselves, for a higher cause. How does history judge such persons in the long run? I would argue that in the long run we gravitate, at least we elevate those who have shown some, even a modicum of service, and what to speak of those who have given their life for it. We elevate them to a higher level than those who are exploiters. And there, as far as being attracted to exploiters, there is a kind of codependency. Because if I'm addicted to exploiting and I see a good exploiter, then I would like to connect myself. And I may even serve that person, just to get the knowledge of how to exploit the world in a more aggressive way. So, does that help?
It did help in terms of looking at
it from the long run, even from the historic point of view,
Yeah.
as opposed to just in the moment.
But even in the moment, I'll just give a scenario. If somebody has an air about him or herself of arrogance or exploitation, there may be a sense of repulsion. And of course, it depends on the context also that the person's in. Because if they're playing a role where they're a leader and they're expected to, teach something or to be an exploiter, as I'm using that word, it's really kind of in a pejorative sense in the context of the conversation. But it might be seen that a person who has those tendencies to control and dominate others may be seen as odious, and we might notice it because that person has an attitude that is not harmonious with others. It's not helpful. Whereas somebody who does have a service attitude, who we feel like, just taking a normal context, that say if you go somewhere to shop, or I used to see on the airline all the time, you notice when somebody extends themselves and they go out of their way. This is something very noticeable practically everywhere in the world. Somebody goes out of the way to do something for you. It really sticks in your mind. That wow, this person really extended themselves. I mean, obviously in many ways people render service because they're obligated to, because it's their job. But what if somebody goes out of their way and they do more than they had to? You'll notice that. It might even get in the paper. Wow, that person stopped. They didn't have to stop, and they helped out. And so this is kind of what I meant, that it's noticeable to us when people do go out of their way to give us service, that it seems to be selfless. It seems to be outside the realm of their obligation within their work or something like that. I know I notice it. And if somebody tries to take advantage of you, and you find out later even, you'll feel not too kindly towards that person later. At least that's the theory I'm presenting. I'll work on it as we talk more about this. 2 more reflections, possible? Right there.
I appreciated the idea of being a servant as our original nature instead of, and the idea of cultivating service. There's a lot of cultivating consciousness or cultivating being, and it's a very popular idea, and self-awareness, and the idea of having cultivating service as our original nature, being a servant as our original nature stuck with me, and not only is that tied to being, but it's also tied to purpose.
Thank you. Very well put. Deeply appreciate it. One more? Yes, right there. Right behind you.
Well, I'm attracted to the notion that when you're out of alignment, it causes friction in your life.
Yeah. Yeah, and then it becomes a quest to find out what is alignment. I mean, there's a lot of that discussion in the world. And this is a very simple concept. In fact, one of the great teachers in our line, goes back a couple hundred years, named Bhaktivinoda Thakur, wrote in a song. And this is one of the ways in which, in most spiritual religious traditions, very profound concepts are passed along in society through poems and songs and so forth. So in his song, written in Bengali, he says, Jeev Krishna Das e Bishwas Korleto Artu Konai. You hear the word duk again. It's very Bengali and Sanskrit and Hindi have a lot of similarities. So the word duk is in there. So he says, Jeev, the soul, means the living force. Jeev Krishna Das. That living force is a servant of God. Jeev Krishna Das e Bishwas. And if you have this conviction, this Bishwas, that this is true, and you're aligned with that idea, that this becomes your self-concept, that I'm a servant of God. He says, Jeev Krishna Das e Bishwas Korleto Artuko Nai. Then for you, there won't be any more misery. The duk will be eradicated in your life because you'll become aligned. So through alignment, one gets this harmony. And it's such a simple concept because it's so natural, and the impetus for service, it's so universal. But if one thinks about it, deliberates on it carefully, and then deliberately give service. One can get this immediate experience that by giving, I grow. Counterintuitive. I think that the more I have, the more I have. But the more I give in service, the more I actually have. And it's actually interesting that I can't keep anything anyway. That there may be a way in which I try to develop assets in this world. But sooner or later that they drift away from me. Right? Do you find this to be true? Please say yes. I feel much better now. Which ways, let's say monetary asset. Which ways might they drift away? Bills. Unexpected bills too come. And I mean, there's the regular ones and then unexpected. Any other ways? Theft. That can happen. Yeah. And so everything goes away from us, whatever we try to hold on to. But if one sees whatever assets one has as useful for serving, and therefore doesn't claim proprietorship over them, and says these are meant for serving, then this is a concrete example of how one becomes relieved of a great burden. That I have something, but I can't keep it. That's a gnawing anxiety that I might have throughout my life. I have something, but I can't keep it. In fact, I read a book called Denial of Death by a psychologist, and he claimed that everything that we do in human society is kind of a distraction from the main topic, which is that I'm mortal and I have to leave the world. And so there's this burden that I carry around. But through the mentality of service, the attitude of service, and the cultivation of service, that what I am and what I have is meant for others, for serving the Supreme, and therefore it's not a burden upon me, because it's not mine, it's meant for others. So this immediately unburdens us, this idea of aligning through service. So then the bhakti yoga process goes into the idea of refining service. First it establishes, does the Bhagavad-gita and other books that speak on this subject of bhakti, that service is universal, it's natural. And then there's a way in which it talks about refinement of service. There's different motivations, and this is very important. What is the motivation through which I render service to others? That makes a difference, does it not? In fact, in our legal system, we count motive very highly. If somebody accidentally kills somebody, if somebody's cleaning their bow and arrow and it goes off through the window and shoots somebody and kills them, and they go to court, they're not going to be judged very severely. Or, let's see, as severely. It was just negligence. But if they, in the heat of the moment, they drew their bow and arrow and they shot somebody, then it's considered to be more severe. If they Googled the person's address and they saw that they bought duct tape and they shot the person, that there was a more definite, clear motive that the person killed somebody, then it's considered to be very severe. So there's a way in which motive is very, it's palpable. It's actually something tangible. And so in the realm of service and cultivation of service, bhakti, the bhakti teachers talk about refining one's service. And so there's service to the Supreme, but what's the motive behind it? There could be different motives, right, for serving God. Do you agree? What might be some of them? Possibly. What was that? To get what? To get to nirvana, yeah. That could be, sounds like very virtuous and, pure. But what other things do people ask for? Wealth? Does anybody remember Janis Joplin? She sang that song, "Oh Lord, won't you buy me a color TV?" My friends all drive Porsches, I must make amends. This is a kind of a parody of the way in which someone might pray to the Supreme. They're praying, and maybe even render service by giving something. I mean, in churches, temples, mosques all over the world, I might give something to God and I might feel like I'm buying a lottery ticket. I mean, this is certainly true in India. I know in some of the big temples, there's a very famous temple named Tirupati, and there's a deity there that millions of people come to see every year. One of my friends, it was back in the 70s, but he was standing there, long lines to come into the temple. And there was a couple of youngsters there. They were in their teens, and they were with their family. They were going in to see the deity, and they were discussing about what they were going to ask for. And so my friend overheard them and said, "So what is that? What were you going to ask from the Lord?" And one of them said, "I want a job, and I want to make $50,000 a year." He said, "You're going to ask the Lord of the universe for $50,000 a year?" And he thought about it for a minute and said, "Okay, 100,000. So, I mean, there may be motivation in my service. I may be giving something because I want something back. And according to the bhakti teachings, this may not be very effective. It's always good according to the Bhagavad-gita, to approach God. But the more the motive is purified and comes to the point of service for service. Everyone say service for service. I love that phrase. There's no other reason. It's just service for service. I'm just doing it because I'm a servant. And I'm doing this because this is my constitutional nature, to serve the Supreme. So one of the teachers of Bhakti I just mentioned a minute ago, who I quoted in the song, Jeev Krishna Das, A. Bishwas in Bengali, lists various motivations for which people might perform service for God. And first, or lowest on the list is fear. I'm motivated by fear. And above that is prospect. Prospect means, what am I going to get in return? And above that is duty. That I do it because it's my duty. That's what I should do. But the highest, he said, is love. And this, there's this poetical statement, love conquers all. And this can be experienced, even in our ordinary dealings, that if someone serves us without motivation, for instance, if someone comes and gives us something without some service or an extension, some gift, and it's obviously they don't want anything in return. Well, let's start with the other way. Let's just say somebody gives you something, you find out later that there were strings attached, and they wanted something in return for the service they rendered to you. How does that make you feel? Used? Who said that? Yeah, makes you feel used. And the service or the gift, it doesn't become as valuable. It's not as considered valuable because it was motivated. Like, have you ever noticed if you look through the news, you might look on these various websites where they're presenting news, and then you go through and you're looking, is anything accurate or true in here? And then you might see one little area where they're offering some information. It says paid content. Somebody paid for that. I don't know how you feel, but whenever I see that, I think, oh, okay, forget that. They can't actually give me accurate information because they want me to buy something. Of course, this indicates some kind of tit for tat, I'm trying to take. So that there's a way in which when I give service and I want something in return, then the potency is greatly diminished, the efficacy of that service, because it's not pure. But when it becomes purified, if someone does an act of selfless service for you, how do you feel? Who said? Grateful. Yeah, gratitude is perhaps the most powerful force in the universe. And it's invoked by this selfless service. If someone does service for you and they don't want anything, they just do it out of love, then there's a way in which it's very difficult, first of all, to reciprocate. You may try, but it's such a big thing that they did. Even if it's a small gesture. An analogy, a small child, it's the mother's birthday, and child goes in the backyard and picks a flower from the mother's garden and then comes back in the house. And out of just love, appreciation for her mother, she says, here, I brought you this flower. The mother knows full well where the flower came from. But how does she feel when it's extended from the loving heart of her daughter? Who said something? Conquered. There's a way in which she may feel conquered. Her heart becomes conquered. And there's another thing that might happen also, and that is the heart might open. The heart becomes larger and it opens. So this is one of the keys to yoga, to bhakti yoga. And that is that God, although He's called the unconquerable, there's no one more powerful than God. That's one of the definitions of the Supreme. No one can conquer Him. But in the concept of bhakti, there's this, and in Sanskrit it's called jita. Jita means unconquerable. Nobody can conquer. No one's more powerful. And however, there's one energy that can conquer God. That's love. It's so powerful because when it's unmotivated and it's completely pure, then jita becomes ajita. So in Sanskrit, when you put an A in front of various terms, it reverses the meaning. So like there's karma and akarma. So karma means that there's a reaction, and akarma means no reaction. So jita means conquered, and ajita means jita means unconquerable, and ajita means somebody who becomes conquered. So the jita becomes ajita by acts of love. So you find in the bhakti scriptures like the Bhagavad-gita, there's a concept, for instance, if you offer with love and devotion a leaf, a flower, fruit, or water, with pure love, you offer it to God, then God says, I'm conquered by that love. I'm overwhelmed by it. And then there's another aspect of becoming enriched with knowledge, with wisdom, that the Bhagavad-gita teaches. And that is, if you want wisdom, where would you go? Where would you think of going? If you wanted great wisdom from the world. Where?
The internet.
The internet. That's good. Of course, you never know. It might be, no, I'm not even going to say it. You can look inside, definitely. What the Bhagavad Gita, and these are all, there's no exact right answer, but the Bhagavad Gita says, go to a person who has wisdom. I mean, we find this in the world. If you find a mentor, if you find somebody who's already a master in something, and you approach the master and you say to her, please teach me what you know. Now, that person may or may not teach it, right? It depends on how you approach. This is what the Bhagavad Gita says. If you approach somebody and for instance, if you're rude and demanding, might that person feel inclined to reveal what he or she has learned over many decades of practice and toil? What do you think? Probably not. However, if somebody, in the Bhagavad Gita said there's three modes of approaching somebody who has knowledge that will compel the person to tell you everything that he or she knows. And that includes service. So the verse in the Bhagavad Gita says, Tadvidi pranipatena prashnena sevaya uparakshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshina. So it says if you want perfect knowledge, then you should go to somebody who already has it. And they're called a tattvavit, somebody who knows things already. They've learned the truth. And then how do you approach? So the first thing is pranipat. It means you should go in a humble mood. Because if you're already empty and you go it's submissively asking, then you're a vessel that can be filled up. So, pranipat. Everyone say pranipat. That means you go with some feeling of submission that you have something, I don't have it, and I'm open. And the next, pranipat, pariprashnena, means that you should ask relevant questions. And the third thing is sevaya. So in Sanskrit, service is seva. Everyone say seva. Seva. So that means what? Service. So one of my friends, a fellow monk, used to say, your seva will save you. So sevaya means when you approach a person in knowledge and you serve the person and ask relevant questions and go as an open vessel, not that I already know everything, then okay, great, good luck. But when you render service, what happens is, if the service is selfless, as we were just discussing, the person's heart opens and the contents flow out to you. And this is one of the primary means through which the Bhagavad-gita and other bhakti literatures advise us to advance in spiritual life, and that is to find those who have refined qualities, spiritual qualities, and then to offer them some service. In fact, there's an idea of relationship that like a monk would have with a spiritual master, and that is that the neophyte would approach the master and then render service. So there's a famous verse from some of the ancient literatures that say, Samit pani shotriyam brahmanishtam. It means when you approach the master, this is from an ancient Vedic literature, which will give the context of in India, said you should come with firewood in your hand. And the reason this is because at the time this verse was written, the spiritual masters would perform a fire ceremony. This still goes on in India and Japan and many other places around the world, where they perform a fire ceremony in which they're propitiating the Supreme through the fire. It's a representative of the Supreme, and they're offering things into the fire with mantra. And so when the neophyte approaches the master, the neophyte should go with firewood in his hand. And that means to do some service, something practical. And when you do that, it means here's some wood for your fire, because it was hard to collect from the forest. You did some manual labor. Manual means with the hands. And then, because of that, then one becomes a candidate for receiving knowledge because you did this service. Now I'll take a few more reflections. Anything else you heard so far that stuck to you, that you can reflect back? Do you like reflections? Making reflections? What do you like about it? It ties everything together. It does for me too. Yeah, when I'm speaking, and then it brings us together as a group, and it does it. When I hear what you heard, then I realize, oh, actually, I said that, and it resonated in one way or another. Yeah, thank you. So give me a fragment. What did you hear? Yes.
That when you approach a wise person that could be a mentor, that you go with the servant's heart and a humble approach and be receptive, but also loving. And that's the recipe for the most likely positive outcome, rather than being more demanding or feeling deserving. Yeah.
See, this is what I like about reflections. She said it 10 times better than what I did. I love that, what you said, the servant's heart. Go with the servant's heart. That's beautiful and poetical. That's something that I'm taking out of here, what you just said. Keep a servant's heart. Because when you think about service, it's not something mechanical necessarily. It's spontaneous. You really, when you see somebody that you appreciate or you love, you're just like, I want to do something for that person. Why? I don't know. I just do. I just appreciate. And that's another aspect of the science of the self. There's this idea in the Bhagavad-gita that we are all parts of the Supreme. Just as there's the sun, and then there's particles of sunlight that come from the sun. And they're one in quality, but in quantity they're different. They're simultaneously, and this is a mind bender, so hold on for a minute. It's called Achintya Beta Beta Tattva. It means we're simultaneously one and different from God. Inconceivably, simultaneously one and different from God. So just like the sun ray, if it comes in the room, we say there's the sun. But is that the sun? Well, it's not the whole sun, because if that was here, or even an inch closer, we wouldn't be here. And so that idea of us being part and parcel of the Supreme is very important in understanding that we have this quality that's the same as the Supreme. Our essence, our essential spiritual quality is the same as the Supreme. And that the mind, which is a subtle part of the gross physical body, is like a movie screen. And we become identified with that and forget about our original spiritual nature. And so through the process of bhakti, one purifies the mind, especially by engaging in an act of service, because the mind is an instrument that is neutral and it can be used in any way. But when it's given the task of rendering divine service, it becomes engaged positively and it reveals our original spiritual selves. How are we doing for time? Because I have a tendency to just keep on going.
It's scheduled till 8:30.
Okay.
We can speak more in the kirtan, and then thesis after that also.
Okay, great. So let's take a few more reflections. Yes.
I like how you mentioned the power of gratitude, and how when someone does something for me, that I feel there's no way that I can reciprocate. Just the immense potency of the feeling of gratitude and wanting to, as you were saying, also service for service, to respond with service for service.
Yeah, and in one of the most famous bhakti literatures, which is considered a postgraduate study of the Bhagavad-gita, it's called the Srimad Bhagavatam. There's a discussion, in this literature also, there's a discussion between a master, spiritual master, and disciple. And in this case, a very interesting context, the disciple is a king, and a very famous and well-loved king. And through various circumstances, he's cursed to die within 7 days. And at the time this was spoken, these curses were uttered by mantra, and they were considered infallible. So he knew he had only 7 days to live. So he left his kingdom, and he went to the bank of the sacred river Ganges, and planted himself there and said, now I have to use the last 7 days with complete purpose. And there's an implication about this. When one becomes so determined to know the truth, then there's a way that heaven and earth move to accommodate. This is one of the universal principles of both the Bhagavad-gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam, that when my desire to know the truth becomes red hot, when it's boiling, then everything comes my way. And in this case, this king named Parikshit, who was sitting on the bank of the Ganges, who gave up all his royal insignias and sat down there completely open to the truth. Then many great teachers came. Of course, you can imagine if our president sat down at the bank of the Potomac and gave up everything, there'd be a few helicopters flying around to see what happened. So in this case, the king is sitting there, and the word got out very quickly. And people came from everywhere, and great learned people came. And they were all offering various suggestions about what's the best thing to do at this point. And then this effulgent young boy, he is actually 16 years old, he was an adolescent, named Shukadeva Goswami, who was known to be enlightened even before his birth. He was so enlightened that he didn't even want to come out of the womb. He said, I want nothing to do with the world. They finally convinced him to come out, and he took off to the forest and was finally compelled to come back by his father to learn this book called the Srimad Bhagavatam. And so after learning the book, the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is incidentally all about pure service to God. It starts off by saying, Dharma projita kaitavo traparamo nirmatsaranam satam. It means this book is for the non-envious. It's for people who no longer have a motive in life. They don't want anything. They only want to serve. They only want to do the highest service. That's who gets to read this book. And it also, and it calls cheating, anything, asking God for anything besides pure service is called kaitava, cheating. So he was the master of this book. I mean, the servant of the book, and therefore he became the master. And he had gone out into the world just wandering, with no other purpose except to show compassion. And the two intersected. And the scene is amazing because there are all these other teachers there who are renowned. But when they see this adolescent coming, they could feel his potency, because when one gives up motive and only wants to serve, then one gains a certain kind of potency. Because when I have a motive in my heart, then I have fear also, because I have something to lose. If I have something to lose, then I can't speak the truth. That's why in universities we have tenure. This is a concept that's passed down from the Vedic culture. In the Vedic culture, the Brahmanas were supposed to be above the law, because of course at that time they were perfectly pure. And in the university system, there's this concept that professors must not be subject to being fired because of their points of view. Because if they were, then they'd be subservient to their paycheck, and they would not then be able to speak candidly, right? So there was this idea. And now Parikshit Maharaj is sitting waiting. Everyone sees the very powerful adolescent coming here, and they all stood up to show respect. And then they offered him the seat of honor. Even elderly sages who were there. And so Shukadeva sits down, and Parikshit, the king, asks him the question, what is the duty of a person who's about to die? And this is an interesting question, because he had 7 days. How many days do we have? Approximately, would you say? I would say 7, because we have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. But honestly, we don't know. There's no contract we sign that says, here, you're guaranteed this much. So in that situation, Parikshit Maharaj asked, so what is my duty now? What am I supposed to do? And so Shukadeva Goswami then gives an elaborate, of course it's 18,000 verses that he speaks, of the most elaborate poetry you can imagine. In fact, there's sections of the Bhagavatam that they're mind-boggling. The use of literary embellishment is astounding. This literature is amazing. It's one of the reasons when the British came to India and they thought they had found a primitive culture, and then they looked at the literature and Sanskrit itself, which the word Sanskrit means refined. It's an extremely refined language. It's like computer language practically. It's so precise that they said, whoops, actually this is a very advanced culture. You can tell from the language. So Shukadeva he opens up his dialogue by saying that you're meant to remember God at the time of death. This is your purpose. And then he goes about various ways of explaining how one can be constantly aware of the Supreme. And I'm coming back to your point about gratitude. As he begins, he says, you should look at the entire universe as the body of the Lord. He said the mountains there are the stacks of his bones, and the trees are the hairs on his body, the rivers are his veins. He goes through a litany of all the various anatomical parts of the Lord in comparison to the universe. And then he points out the trees, and he says, look at the trees. They're holding out their arms, they're extending, and they're holding fruits out. One tree can feed a whole village. And what to speak, when you look inside, then you find that there's seeds. Who thought of that? Seed you plant, and then it grows another tree, which can grow into an orchard, can feed a city. And so he said, be grateful. See that there's a benevolence behind this whole plan. And he advocates. This is the beginning to developing this service attitude, service for service, with no motivation. And that is that I feel the benevolent presence everywhere I go. I see it within nature. I see that it's planned and it's being offered to me. And therefore, my heart opens, because there's this reciprocation that the Supreme is giving me everything, and is not only extending food for every living entity to eat, but is also giving me my very intelligence to be able to perceive anything. And so this is the opening to the book, this advocacy for developing gratitude and seeing the world as being moved by the benevolent hand of the Supreme. So this gratitude is an extremely powerful force that leads to finer and finer sentiments towards the divine, which culminate in pure service with no motivation, just wanting to reciprocate what's being given already. What else? Yes?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. For many people, science is their religion, for many people. And what really struck me with what you were saying so kindly is that science means self-evident. And for many of us, it's self-evident when we do something out of our hearts for people. And what incredible science this is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. As a matter of fact, historically, science and religion were married to one another. There's a way in which, over time, they became divorced, and they're better together. Actually, they were off together. What else? Yes. Here comes the mic.
I like how you keep reinforcing the concept that service is our original nature, because for centuries, poets and philosophers have always tried to hammer home, like Nietzsche's, that our nature is to take and to climb and try to get whatever we can. But now scientists even are starting to understand that benevolence and altruism is our original nature, and that by coexisting together we can achieve more. And then I think it's just a matter of time before they even take that a step further to realize it's not just altruism and benevolence, but service.
Yes, thank you. Well put. It's very interesting that the approach to the world, our worldview, and in the Bhagavad-gita, Krishna talks about wisdom. What are the elements or the tenets of wisdom itself? And he starts off with amanitvam adambitvam, which means humility and pridelessness. There's a way in which opening one's heart and mind to the idea that I'm a helpless entity, I'm dependent, and therefore feeling oneself humble, humility and pridelessness, then opens one up to knowledge. And there is another approach, which is that I've evolved to a certain point where I can dominate nature. I will pry out of her, her hands, the secrets of the universe. But we're finding that to be elusive. In fact, there are scientific theories that show that as you observe nature, it morphs into something else. You can't. There's a principle that says you can't ever see things the way they actually are, because as soon as you become the observer, then the subject itself changes, and the secrets of the universe, or just circumscribing everything in one calculation, as physics attempted to do at one point, is not possible. We're finding that because matter, which is the stuff of which the universe is made up with, and spirit, the soul, which feels gratitude, which feels the need for serving the Supreme, is categorically different from matter. It's not that spirit arises from matter by spontaneous combustion, according to the Vedas, but it is from a different world. And therefore we see also symptoms in the world that people gravitate towards service anyway. We notice, we even look at the political process. Let's not bring that up. I've been in other countries like Thailand, where we see that there's a king. Right now, actually, they're mourning his death. He died some months ago, and nobody's celebrating anything for a year. But they love their king there. And I noticed it. It's palpable when you're there in Thailand, or when I was there. I spent some time there, and I felt how much people loved their king and revered him. And there's a way in which there's a natural propensity that we have to want to idealize someone and actually render some service to the higher. And this, according to the Vedas, is the natural propensity of the soul towards the Supreme. And of course, there are many kinds of service we may render in this world, through which we may become disappointed in the object of our service ultimately. But in serving the Supreme, there is no such disappointment, because the very definition of God is that He's completely perfect. And the way in which He's perfect, according to the Bhakti path, is perfect in His reciprocation of our love. And this is an interesting topic also, because we may become givers, but some people are not complete takers. It's not so easy to take things. In fact, we see in the history of the world, people have tried to propagate various ideas and religious systems, and people didn't want it, and they wouldn't take it. So they were forced to take it, or they were killed if they didn't take it, and so forth. And this shows also there's a way in which people may not be fully equipped to take, but the idea given in the Bhagavad-gita of God is He's called Bhoktaram Yagatapasam. He's the one who can take whatever you give Him. He can take it, He can digest it, and He can give it back perfectly, in perfect harmony to everyone. And this is what everyone's looking for ultimately, according to the Gita, Bhagavad-gita, which is the place in which I can give unlimitedly, because it's my nature, but where it can also be taken perfectly, and then given back, reciprocated perfectly. So this is the way in which this bhakti is about love. It's about the eternal reciprocation that is always growing between the living entities, ourselves, and the Supreme. And there's no end to it. There's no satiation. It continues to grow, that reciprocation of love between the living entity and God. I extrapolated a lot of what he said. Thank you for your excellent point. What else? Yes?
I appreciated that kind of one-liner you gave, and your friend who said that your seva, your service, your seva will save you. Because I was thinking that it has a lot of depth to it, actually. Sometimes, you may think that, I'm doing God a favor, I'm doing someone a favor by doing service. But actually, it's the other way around. And if I consider it a burden, or if I consider that, actually, maybe I can't do it perfectly, so I shouldn't do it, or whatever the hesitation is, it doesn't work out for us, because it's so much intrinsic to who we are to serve, that if we just sit on it, we don't actually share, we don't actually give back, then there's no way in which it actually pays off for us. We actually become unhappy. It's for our benefit, and we just suffer without it.
Thank you for the point. there's a way in which when one realizes that by giving I grow, by giving I actually become bigger and more full. What a revelation this is, because it's so hard to take. It's hard to get anything. In fact, there's a passage in one of the books from another bhakti literature that says, where a great saint is talking to his disciples, and he asks them, he had accepted the renounced order of life and then had gone out into the world with nothing. And then his disciples had followed him, and he turned around and said, "Did you bring anything?" And they said, "No, we didn't bring anything. You didn't tell us to bring anything." He said, "Good, because you'll observe." And this is very similar. Jesus told some of his followers to observe the birds in the field and see how they're being fed. They're being sustained. So he said, the Lord has filled up the universe with food and money, but you can only get what's allotted to you. You can't get any more. Otherwise, everyone would have huge stockpiles. It only comes to you according to his will. And so there's a revelation that one might have that I actually become wealthy by giving, by serving. And as much as of an impetus I have to advance by taking, by organizing my life in such a way that I can take more, I might then reorganize my life in ways I can give more, seeing this principle. And then a great teacher who is a godbrother to my spiritual master once said that there's, in the beginning of this kind of revelation, there may be some hesitancy. Because after all, there's a sense that I have to survive in this world. Because this is the law of the world, that survival of the fittest. And so he said in the beginning, when one is introduced to the concept of giving, one might think there's all risk and no gain. And what I'm risking by giving away, because I might starve later. That's the primal urge that I might have. But then he says, as you enact the principle of giving, you'll begin to learn that it's all gain and no risk. And what kind of life is that, of free giving? There's no more limitation on such a person, because such a person then knows that the law of the universe is that the purer my service, and the more I give, the more I become enriched. What kind of community would that be like? And what would a person's life be like who has come to that kind of a realization? One more, and then we'll try a mantra, because I was told, I was asking about your church, and do you call it a church? Yeah, and they were saying that you're very learned, and you take from various traditions around the world, and that you like mantras. I don't know if that part was true. It's true? Oh, you like mantras? Okay. I do a seminar called The World Moves by Mantra. Everything moves by mantra in the world. So I would take one more reflection, and then I will do a mantra. And interestingly enough, the main mantra that has been given to us in our tradition is in Sanskrit, but the translation of it is, "O my Lord, O energy of the Lord, please engage me in your service." So that's it's written in the vocative form. So it's really a call out, just saying, "Please give me service. Let me serve you." So that's a powerful prayer to put out, and that's the meaning of the mantra that you were all chanting when we first came in. Can we have one more reflection? Yes, 1, 2. A 2 for 1.
Just thinking about everything that you've said and everything that all the other reflections have brought together, and going back to the very beginning, I'm inspired that we started out by talking about how suffering happens and within us when our attention is in the wrong place. And it's so very easy in today's world for our attention to come down to what's in my life and what's happening, and that leaves my attention and leave my connection to God. And all of this service, it has to happen in the present. We can't be giving service in the future once we've given service. It's in the past. And so by staying in the present, it helps redirectionalize our attention to my connection to the divine.
Wow.
So everything you said has brought me to that.
Fantastic. Thank you. That was really amazing that you said that. I live in California, and I regularly give talks at Salesforce and Google. In fact, the CEO of Salesforce, he had these gigantic buildings downtown. I had no idea you could make so much money selling software. I really did. No idea. But they have high-rise buildings in San Francisco. It's very expensive property. On every floor of these buildings, they have meditation rooms. Yeah. And Google's very open also. I haven't met the CEO there or anything like that, but I know that they're very open to expanding consciousness. And so the reason I brought that up was because I just gave a talk about the importance of attention. So the word attention, it has this little particle ten from Latin, which means to extend or to connect, just like tendon. It connects the muscle and the bone. And so in a similar way, we're connected to the world through our attention. And of course, there's intention also. And the two concepts are very much connected. But the theory I proposed at Salesforce recently was that all we really have is our attention. That is, we have the free will to direct our attention in various ways. And that's what we actually have. The other things that I think I have, as we resolved before as a group, I don't really have because they come and go. They're only in my care temporarily, and I don't get to keep them. But my attention is something that's quintessentially mine because I can decide where to place it. And so this is a vital aspect of the practice of bhakti, is where I am placing my attention. And as you so expertly and aptly pointed out, that putting one's attention towards service in the moment is altogether practical and completely satisfying, as one can keep one's mind on service in each moment and keep bringing it back to that service, and therefore feel complete satisfaction. Thank you very much. So, yes, please.
I was just going to reflect back to the beginning where we weren't sure, for who's a giver and who's a taker, right? And from my take of that is it doesn't matter if we can recognize who's the taker out of the group, it's if we can recognize it in ourselves and recognize what to give or take.
So let me make sure I have understanding of reflection. Is that we'll notice the qualities in others that we have in ourselves? Something like that?
When she was having a hard time wrapping her mind around when there's always a taker in the group, they will always...
Oh, I see. You're right.
Yeah. What word you used for that?
Exploitation or exploiter.
Finding that exploiter. I don't think it necessarily matters to find out who the exploiter is, but knowing when to...
Where you're at with yourself.
Yeah. And I, by the way, I wasn't advocating that we,
right.
that we question them at the door or anything like that. It's like, hey, by the way, why are you here anyway? I'm just kidding around. But my point was that it's noticeable. I mean, we're very subtle. We're subtle entities. And we notice things. And we may not notice them right away, but eventually we always notice something. In fact, I was taught in communication, a class I took on communication, about when you write a letter, if you're going to ask somebody for a favor, then ask in the beginning and then put all the pleasantries at the end. Because if you put the pleasantries in the beginning and you ask at the end, the person will say, they didn't mean what they said in the beginning. They only wanted to ask for that. That's how subtle we are. And so I'm just pointing out that if there is a motive somewhere, we will discover it sooner or later. It may not be immediately, but it is discovered because we appreciate this quality of purity in others. This is my argument. This is my argument. So, if we refine ourselves towards that principle, then it will be noticed by it. The world picks up on it. The whole universe, the way in which I'm maintained in the world is really dependent on the what I'm holding inside me. I create my reality. And there's subtle ways in which I can become entangled in the world because of my exploitative mentality. There's no getting away with anything. There's no getting away with anything. And the only reasonable way to be extricated from the complexities of the material world is to purify one's heart of all motivation except for one, which is to serve God and with a pure motive of service for service out of gratitude, and service out of appreciation and love. And that's the force that is all powerful in this world. So powerful that when it comes from the tiny soul, that can conquer God, because the power of love, of placing our attention towards God for the purpose of service, it actually attracts God's attention and special compassion towards us. This is the point made in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So, boy, look at all this stuff. You're really into music here, aren't you? Yeah. This is great. I love this place. It's really nice what you've done here. I'm so glad this is here. Shall we chant a little bit? Just happen to have Ananda with us. He's a musician. He travels all over the world and plays music for people. And shall we do a little chanting? This is called a khol. Everyone say khol. 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 And so, have you ever seen a tabla? Alaraka was famous. I think he was at Monterey Pop Festival back with Jimi Hendrix. But there's the tabla sits on the floor, and there's two drums that play with two hands like that. This is an earlier edition of that. And one of the reasons that it's in this form is because you can wear it like I'm wearing it, and you can stand up, and you can wear it and dance around at the same time. So in the tradition this comes from, there's a way in which the performers would sing spiritual songs, and they would stand up and they would, with their instruments, and they would dance. So they had this drum so that it could be mobile and they could move around different places. And of course, this is a European instrument, but it found its way to India. It's a reed instrument called a harmonium, just like a piano or an accordion. Not accordion. And then we have... And then we have one other percussion instrument. It's called a kartal. Do we have a certified kartalist in here? Tushta? Come on up. Take a look at a certified kartalist. He carries a card in his wallet. If he gets pulled over at any time, he just pulls out. They say, "Oh, you're a certified kartalist, you can go." If you know how to play these, you'll be respected anywhere, on any freeway in the world. And so that's another rhythm instrument, just made out of bell metal. You can hold those up. Sululu like cymbals. And so just with these few instruments, and not even necessary to have the harmonium. Sometimes it's just with what's called khol and kartal, the traditional Bengali style. And you'll find sadhus, or those who are practicing bhakti very intensely. They'll sit sometimes for hours and they'll have this chant. And they use the rhythm, and then when you bring in the melody also, it's also compelling. There's a way in which rhythm is the universal language. Anywhere you go in the world where there's some rhythm, then everyone, doesn't matter if you speak the language or not, you'll feel attracted. And if the music is nice and there's some melody, then also it can actually help to open the heart. The idea is, the mantra is, I think we have a little too much gain. Gain can come down. Then, thank you, Susan. There's the mantra. Man means, so a dual word. Everyone say mantra. So this is a dual word. Man means mind. And tra comes from the word triate, which means to deliver. So it takes the mind away from its petty cares and brings one to the point of introspection and thinking about service to God. So the mantra is said to be inherently spiritual. It's a vibration, and although it travels through the same airwaves, the mantra itself is said to have inherent potencies, spiritual potencies. And so when performed with no motive except to ask God for more service, that has a very powerful effect, especially when it's done in a group setting, because then you get the combined sincerity of all those who participate. And so the normal way that this is done is there's a call and repeat. Have you done this before? You're all familiar with this? I'll just, for thoroughness, so all sing the mantra, and then whoever would like to add to it, then you can repeat back. And we'll have this call and respond. And this is called kirtan. Everyone say kirtan.
Kirtan.
So this comes from a word in Sanskrit, kirti, which means to expand the fame. Kirti means fame. So kirtan means you're actually extolling the glories of God. And this is, of course, something that people from our culture are very used to, for singing for the Lord. It opens the heart, opens the mind, and it glorifies God, purifies the world by the sound vibration. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Thank you. So there's 3 words in this mantra. Hare. Everyone say Hare. Hare. And actually, so there's various ways in which words are conjugated in Sanskrit. So it comes from the word Hari. So say Hari. So Hari means one. It's a name for God. It means one who takes away, and it means one who takes away all one's burden and miseries. So Hare is the vocative form of that, calling out to the Lord who takes away all our burden. And then Krishna, it comes from the word Karshini, which means the attractive force. Everything that we see in this world that's beautiful, powerful, full of wisdom, strength, comes from our original divine source, Krishna. And so the word Krishna means the attractor, and Rama, everyone say Rama. Rama means happiness, and also means spiritual strength, because with all the distractions and temptations that we encounter in this world, one needs spiritual strength, and one also needs a higher taste in order to overcome the lower tastes of this world. So Rama is the embodiment of all spiritual strength and taste. So the mantra together has these names of God, and in its entirety, in the way it's laid out, the essence of it is a prayer to please engage in service. Please engage me in your service. And that is a practical way, this prayer, to absorb one's mind in thinking of God, because in the philosophy given in the Bhakti scriptures, the name of God is the same as God, because He's absolute. There's no difference. So one can commune with the Lord directly oneself by calling upon His name. Once someone told me there's a way in which if you're thirsty, you might ask for water and someone might tell you, it's available there in the clouds, help yourself. So in a similar way, someone might tell me, I'm searching for God, and you say, He's in heaven, please connect. It's like, how? Where's heaven and how far? And someone else might say, I may say, I'm thirsty, and someone may say, you want water? You can find it in a flash flood. But how am I going to do that? So there's this idea that God appears on earth at various times and sequences. At least in the Vedas, there are various incarnations of God that come to the world, but how will I arrange to be here at that time? I hardly know how I came to the world myself and when I'm going to leave. And then someone might say, well, He's in your heart. You find Him there through the process of yoga. And this, like when I ask for water and you say, dig a hole, and you'll find it in the ground somewhere. You have to go deep enough. That's also a lot of labor. But with the repetition of the divine names of God is compared to water in the palm of your hand. You can simply drink. At any time, you can repeat the names of the Lord and call out for service. And one's attention is then brought to that, to the fact that I'm a servant of God and that He's present with me in every moment. And His full potencies are there within His name. Are there any questions? Do we have a couple more minutes, or is it time to serve out?
If there's any questions, we can entertain them.
Yes.
Let me turn it on.
You said earlier about attention.
Yes.
Could you say that again about attention? And my question is going this direction. I'm thinking of elders or other people who lose their minds. My mom just died of dementia, and you were talking about attention relative. My understanding of it was being present to self. So I'm curious, from the spiritual practices that you have in training, how does that get explained? Or I guess maybe more to the point, where was my mom? Where are other people who have...
Was it your mother?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. My father...
have dementia.
My condolences, by the way. My father passed away from Alzheimer's. So I had a similar experience of him drifting away, his personality going away, and certainly his attention finally. Well, just from a practical point of view, the Bhagavad-gita explains that we have a gross and subtle material body, and we are the animator of that. I would call it a biological robot. Did any of you eat biofuel today? For your biological robot? Yes. Yes, you did. Because that's what it runs on. And so the body is more or less mechanical. The eyes are little lenses. They don't see, but they allow light in. And then the mind and the intelligence are described in the Bhagavad Gita to be like software. Of course, they don't use that terminology because there weren't computers at that time. But the idea is that the mind is the place in which the information that comes from the outside world can be sorted out and interpreted according to the way the mind has been developed. And it can be developed variously. And then the actual experiencer is what is called the Atma, or the self, the spiritual soul, what we call a soul, that's behind the body, and which is categorically different from the energy of the body. Krishna describes in the Bhagavad-gita, Bhumir apo analo vayu kammano pudirevacha ahankara ityame bina prakritirashada. Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and ego. This is what makes up the gross and subtle material body. And then he says, Aparayam vitastanyam prakritim vidime param jivabhuta mahabaho yedam darite jagat. Above that is the spiritual particle, which is superior to matter. And that's what animates the body. So when the mechanical body is functioning the way it should be, then we're able to take advantage of that machinery. And when it begins to fall apart, just like if you have your computer, if you get some malware or something like that, and it gets messed up, it gets degraded, then you can't process the information. So the soul is never affected. It's not that the soul is never diminished, it never dies, but the equipment through which it's experiencing the world is diminished. And therefore the soul's ability to communicate through that apparatus is compromised. So that's a very clinical explanation of it. And also, there are many different kinds of memory. Besides just the way in which I take information and I remember facts and figures, even psychologists today talk about how we have a kind of visceral memory. There are memories that we get through smelling certain things or hearing certain music, and that we feel in various environments. It invokes memories that we keep within our heart. Because, of course, in the Vedas and in the Bhagavad-gita, it discusses how we as souls are in a continuum. This is not our first life. We're moving through various other bodies on each one giving us an opportunity to refine ourselves. And so memory, even in somebody who's maybe somebody's been a spiritual practitioner and then they begin to lose the mechanics, it doesn't mean that they don't have the very powerful memory of the heart, emotional memory that is also invoked at the time when they're leaving the body and so forth. But this is the explanation that is given in the Bhagavad-gita of how it is that one loses one's attention, ability to place attention in the world, because it's mechanical. At least our use of this particular body to interact with the physical world is a mechanical function, and the soul works through that. So when that's lost, then we're temporarily obscured from being able to interact with the world. Does that help? Thank you. Nice question. Okay, and now the time is definitely up, and I offer my deepest gratitude to Susan and to all of you for having me into your family for the night, because I feel really happy to be here. And I think now that I saw all of you, that the world's a better place. Thanks for walking the earth. Namaste. Namaste. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And so as we begin to close this out tonight, there is some food down in the lower level for us to engage in. And if you are moved to make a donation, this would be certainly appreciated to cover some of the costs of the food. And for your presence here, we thank you. And we know that each one of us carries within us that light that is of service, that light that is of compassion, as I like to call it. And so I ask you in this time of season, in this time of light, to go out and shine your light and be the light in the world. And so thank you all for being here this evening. Join us downstairs.
Natari Armarman, Natari Armarman, Natari Armarman, hey, Natari Armarman, Natari Armarman. Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman.